Welcome to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. Each week, we interview top experts in physical therapy, pain science, and integrative pain care. You'll learn the most up-to-date information for treating and reversing persistent pain. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here's your host, Dr. Joe Tatta.
Hey there, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Healing Pain Podcast, the show where we explore the dynamic world of chronic pain, neuroscience, physical therapy, and the opportunities for transforming how pain care is delivered. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Tatta, CEO of the Integrative Pain Science Institute, where we train physical therapists and other practitioners on integrative whole-person pain care. On today's episode, we're discussing hope, widely considered as an important therapeutic factor in health, and the usefulness of hope as a therapeutic intervention, not only for chronic pain, but also many other chronic health conditions. We're joined this week by Dr. Dillon Caswell. Dillon is a sought-after doctoral trained physical therapist with over a decade of experience in practice as well as higher education as an adjunct professor at SUNY Upstate Medical University. Dillon is on a mission to cut through the misleading narratives that surround the human experience of healing while unearthing the science that supports this process. Dillon is host of one of the world's leading health podcasts called the Prehab Podcast, as well as the author of a new book called Hope Not Nope, Reclaiming Identity as a Lifelong Athlete in the Sick Healthcare System. In today's episode, we dive headfirst into the pressing challenges society faces when it comes to pain and the process of healing. We'll also explore the heart-wrenching question of why people give up on meaningful activities and how we can infuse hope into a healthcare system that sometimes feels like it's drowning in despair. Dillon's work also begins to unravel the incredible power of the human brain and how a shift in our mindset can be the key to unlocking relief for those suffering from chronic pain. Thank you for joining us today as we embark on this transformative journey of discovering the role that hope plays in chronic pain recovery. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and make sure to share this episode with your friends and family. Without further ado, let's begin and let's meet Dr. Dillon Caswell. Hey there, Dillon. Welcome. It's great to have you on this week.
Joe, thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
Me too. It's a topic I think we dance around this topic a lot, but we don't ever talk directly to it or raise awareness directly around it the way you're doing with some of the work that you're leading. So I think, we're going to talk about some of the work that you do kind of as a licensed physical therapist and practitioner, and then raising awareness around this topic. Why is the topic of hope something that we should be talking about in chronic pain and chronic illness, just really in healthcare in general?
Yeah, it's a great way to start it off and to dive into it. I think there's a lot of misconceptions on the term hope. A lot of people will think that hope means that it's something passive, that you're just sitting there and hoping that something gets better. You're hoping that you get out of chronic pain. You're hoping that you get back to these activities. And when we look at hope, there's a famous researcher out of Kansas University named C.R. Schneider. And he was a hope researcher and found that for hope to exist, it's an interplay of the following three statements of self-agency, goal-directed behavior, and a framework. So when we start to look at that, we start to understand why hope is so important to be integrated into our healing process, because so much of what we're getting from our current healthcare system, speaking to the United States, is nope. You go in, you're in pain, you're uncertain, you don't know what's going on, and you just want to know, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be able to work? Am I going to be able to provide for my family? Am I going to be able to play this sport? Am I going to be able to go for the morning run? Like all these things that make you the person that you are, you're starting to wonder, am I going to be able to do these things? Because I'm uncertain. My movement system seems pretty chaotic right now. I'm having this pain response and I may not know what's creating it. And then I go into an office and instead of getting a solution, I'm just being told or given more evidence that I'm frail and I'm fragile. And it could be through imaging. It could be by not being heard. There's research showing that a person is interrupted every 11 seconds in an office when they're trying to tell their story. I go back and I think of like growing up and having an Italian family. of how frustrating it is to attempt to tell a story and then continuously get interrupted, you get to the point where you're like, I'm just not going to tell the story anymore. Like I'm checked out of this because I just want to move on to the next thing. So many people are having this experience when they're looking for some certainty or looking for answers or looking for a solution, they're just getting further rejected. And then they start to give up things that are meaningful because they're afraid. They're afraid to live the life that they were meant to live. I commonly say that we have so many people in this world, but not a lot of people are alive. A lot of people are just getting up and putting their effort into just getting through that day. Granted, we all have those days. We all have those days that you're like struggling to get through. But overall, we need more people that are alive, that are enthusiastic, that are happy to be doing the things that they were meant to do. And to me, that's where hope comes in, is that we need self-agency. We need to recognize that we can take ownership of our actions. There's this common thought that, we have this lizard brain that controls us, and this lizard brain makes us do these certain things. But learning from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's one of the top neuroscientists in the world, we learned that, well, you know what? We actually have the ability to respond versus react to situations. We actually have the ability to create self-generated actions to start to take control of whatever experience that we're going through. So a lot of people, they'll kind of sit back and just be delivered the nope and go, well, whatever, that's just what was supposed to happen. I'm not supposed to move forward with this. And there's a whole other side to this story that we're hoping to give through this message of hope, not nope.
So we talk a lot about active ways to cope with pain and other conditions, and then there are passive ways to cope. It sounds like really what you're saying is hope is an active means of coping with whatever condition, situation, poor health that someone's facing. Because I think initially when people think of hope, it's almost like people, you hear the expression, well, I'm going to just hope and tonight I'm going to hope and pray on this, basically, right?
Right.
And some people view that as taking a more passive or backseat approach to what they're dealing with. But you're really trying to say, no, hope is actually a positive psychological way to cope with whatever it is that you're facing.
Absolutely. It's using these self-generated actions, goal-directed behavior, and then a framework to achieve it. One of my favorite sayings is that hope is learned and earned, meaning that we learn to become hopeful when we face adversity and we face suffering. Because if you're living, you're going to face adversity and suffering as part of the human experience. It's one of the things that we can guarantee in this life is that there is suffering, there are obstacles that you're going to face. But as you go through those and you adapt and you become more resilient, you start to learn that I can remain hopeful in these situations. And it didn't happen by you passively just letting these things happen to you. They happened because you decided to lean into it. You decided that there's going to be a different outcome that was going to happen from that obstacle. So hope, as you said, it's like people think of it as being this passive, I'm just going to hope that it gets better, but hope is really learned and then it's earned. So how is it earned? Well, it's earned from putting the work in. It's earned by taking actionable steps to get closer to that outcome.
So, of course, this is all wrapped up in the thought of how do we help people heal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, how do we help people? Because we're really what you're saying is that in some way our job as a practitioner, or maybe your job as a friend or a colleague, is to empower someone to heal, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you see with regard to, I think, the way we approach, on this podcast, it's chronic pain, but in general, how we approach the healing of chronic illness and disease in our Western society and Western medicine?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's partly why I wrote the book, Hope Not Nope, is to hopefully become part of the solution. I spent so much time becoming angry and complaining about the healthcare system and how it was. I said earlier that we all will face suffering, but my belief is that our suffering has been conditioned to be longer than what was meant to be because of the narrative that's surrounding these chronic illnesses and the lack of control. And I think when we look at the numbers of chronic disease, it's pretty scary of the rates of diabetes, type 2 diabetes that's increasing and just seeing this number increase, but people not getting the message of there's a lot of lifestyle habits that you can use that this thing can be preventable. Type 1 diabetes, completely different story, but type 2, we have a really good chance to get rid of that. Chronic pain, when we look at the current treatments that are offered for chronic pain, and Joe, I know you've done a lot of work in this area, but at least in the United States, people are most of the time offered opioids as a first line defense to taking care of their chronic pain. And we know that that's not the solution. Upstate New York this year, we've gotten a ton of pollen. Like, there hasn't been a lot of rainfall, so there's been all this pollen just all over the place. And I have a studio, and out in front of the studio, there was just this layer of pollen just coating the driveway. I spent about 3 weeks sweeping out the garage because of all the pollen that was in there. I kept sweeping it out to the driveway. Next day I'd go in, pop the door open, pollen would come back in. And I kept doing this over and over and over again until I had the realization that I need to take the next step. And the next step is I've swept the pollen out of the studio. Now I need to get it out of the driveway, or else it's just going to keep blowing back in again. And I think when we look at chronic disease, that's what the current model is right now. It's taking the pollen and it's sweeping it back out into the driveway, but it's not taking care of what's causing that underlying condition. So we give these, or we offer these short-term fixes. And what ends up happening is that the person then just gets in the cycle that it keeps coming back because what has likely created it hasn't been dealt with front on. It's just been distracted. So to me, that's the challenge, is how do we get our system to start taking that second step? How do we get people to start going, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and decline that opioid because I want a different approach that's going to take the pollen and get it out of the driveway. Because once that's out of the driveway, and back to that analogy, now I'm not spending my morning sweeping for an hour. I'm not spending my evening sweeping for an hour. So now I've gifted back myself 2 hours in the day to now partake in meaningful activity, because sweeping is not meaningful to me. It's a task that I do to keep my clients happy, but it's not something I enjoy doing. Now I don't have to sweep as much. That means I have 2 more hours to read, 2 more hours to research, 2 more hours to hop into conversations. So now by doing that and taking that extra step, I've now gifted my time to be able to do things that are more fulfilling. And then by doing that, as that time adds up over time, my body's going to start to heal itself because of the fulfillment that it's feeling. Instead of doing these tasks, it's going to be excited to do these things.
It's interesting because, when you see people with pain as well, when we talk to people with pain in their history somewhere, at one point they had a rich, full, active life, right? And then this pain developed, or this condition developed, whatever happened to someone. And there is kind of like this tipping point where you can see like the meaningful activities at that point started to become less important, or for some reason got pushed to the wayside or got put on the back burner. And it's interesting to see, like, or start to think about, why do people give up their meaningful activities? Like, if they are meaningful and they do bring you a sense of joy and fulfillment, and, you see a lot of value in what's being done, what does lead to kind of that straw breaking the camel's back, if you will, of, okay, now I'm just not going to focus on my meaningful activities. I'm just going to focus on my pain, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. I think the short answer to that is fear. Is fear of, if they were to continue that activity, of what potentially could happen. And I think it starts with the conversation of what is pain, because pain is this experience that most of us are going to have. I used to say all of us are going to have it, but there is a condition, congenital insensitivity, in which a person doesn't have that output of pain. And what's really interesting is that when people have that, their lifespan is shorter. And so pain actually gives us a constraint. It lets us know our thresholds, and that can be an emotional threshold, it can be a physical threshold. But taking that step back, I think we need to change our perspective on pain. Pain is not a bad thing. Pain is a constraint. Pain is asking us to change something about our life or something about our being. It may be our sleep habits. It may be our relationships. It might be our work. It might be an activity that we're doing. But pain is a request to change something about your being. Now, with that being said, I was researching and reading the story about Albert Einstein, which I included in the book because it really got me thinking. And I started by saying it was from Albert Einstein because you'll hear the story and you'll be like, wow, that sounds really witty. And then you're like, oh yeah, that was Albert Einstein. Like that makes sense. But the story goes that Albert Einstein was a freshman in his college class, and his professor stated the question, if God exists and God created everything, then did God create evil? So the class is pretty silent, and Einstein raises his hand, and he goes, well, I have a question for you. Does cold exist? And the professor goes, of course cold exists. And Einstein goes, no. We have heat, we have mega heat, we have all these different levels of heat. We have absolute zero. We can continue to measure heat as it gets hotter, but we have no measurement for cold. Cold doesn't exist. Cold is just the absence of heat. The professor goes, oh, okay. Einstein keeps going. He goes, does darkness exist? And the professor goes, of course darkness exists. And Einstein, kind of same thing, says, well, no, we can measure the speed of light. We have all these different variables for light, but we're continuously looking for dark matter and we can't find it. Darkness is the absence of light. So he keeps on going on. And in this story, what really stuck out to me and what I started reflecting on in our work is, does pain exist? Or is it an absence of something? Because we've seen the definition of pain evolve. We've seen the international societies developing more pain definitions. And basically what it comes down to is that it's an individualized experience that's specific to that person and the parameters around it. So we could have the same shoulder injury, but our response to that can be completely different depending on your previous beliefs, your mindset, your environment, solutions that you've been offered. So we can have the same injury, but have a completely different pain response to it. So it really got me thinking, does pain really exist? And it's a deep thought question. I know it's one that when people are listening, they're probably like, what do you mean? Yeah, pain exists. But the question that I pose is, does it exist, or is it just an absence of meaningful activity? And the reason that I pose that is because when people that I've worked in that are in chronic pain and they have that tipping point in which they've given up their meaningful activity. I give an example in the book about this. I worked with this one lady and she was in chronic pain for years. And, we tried a bunch of different things and it seemed like nothing was working. And I got to the end where I was like, I don't really think I have much more that I can offer. Like, I'm not giving up on this, but I just don't want to be wasting her time. I want to make sure that she's seeing the right provider and getting the right things. She mentioned to me that her lifelong childhood dream was to go horseback riding. And she was going on a trip to Puerto Rico. And she was wondering, do you think it would be a bad idea to ride the horse? And we got into the conversation and we kind of worked through it together. And I was like, well, it's been your lifelong dream to ride this horse. You have the opportunity to do it. What's keeping you? And she's like, well, the back pain that I feel. Well, if you ride the horse or you don't ride the horse, you're still going to have back pain. So why not just try it? Like, just go for it. And if it's bothering you, then at least you tried it. Then you're not living with this what if, right? You don't have that regret anymore. She came back. She had the biggest smile on her face. She rode the horse. The entire time that she rode the horse, she had no back pain. It was the first time that she had no back pain for a part of the day in a long time. She had no back pain. She came back. She had one more appointment with me and she kept the appointment because she wanted to tell me about the experience. Like, that's what the appointment was for. I'm like, you can just call. And she's like, no, I want to come in. I'm like, okay. And I'm glad she did because I got to see that smile and the glow that she had back. It was amazing. She had no back pain while riding the horse. And when you learn about spine mechanics and all the things that you think you would need for horseback riding, like, you would think that this is going to, quote unquote, destroy her spine. And it didn't. It led to her having a better well-being. So then I really got into this of like, wow, people do really well in chronic pain when we start to replace the pain they're experiencing with meaningful activity.
Mm-hmm. And that's common in, when you start to look at, there are lots of different, methods out there, but when you look at a lot of methods that center around chronic pain, things like behavioral activation, activities of daily living, values-based activities, meaningful activities, they all kind of point in that area. But As you're telling that story, which I think is a great story to tell, because all of us as physical therapists probably have a similar story to that, where a patient was in pain, they were unsure whether they should do something. We basically encouraged them or gave them permission to do that one thing. And it worked out well for them. They felt good and they didn't have any pain from it, or at least maybe the pain didn't get any worse. As you're telling the story, I'm kind of like, I'm tracking that story with you. So there are kind of three distinct parts I see there. Mm-hmm. The first is the relational piece that's happening between you and the patient, the person you're caring for. And I see hope instilled there because you were probably the first person that instilled hope in her that she could do something that she probably never thought she'd be able to do, right? Mm-hmm. Then I think she probably thought about it, contemplated it for a while, and hope started to build up inside of herself, right? Mm-hmm. And then she actually gets on the horse. All right, maybe a little nervous, not sure I should be doing this, like thinking about my spine. Oh, the therapist said it was okay, right? And then you do this activity and you're in the Caribbean, it's sunny, and you're riding a horse and it's fun, and I'm sure there's friends and family around, et cetera. And more hope builds, right? Mm-hmm. So it makes me wonder, is as we start to look for things that alleviate pain, right? Is what you're saying in some way is that hope is one of the great anesthetizers that we have access to?
I think it is, and it's really part of the mission. Is that from my experiences in researching this, I think hope can be the greatest healing agent that we have available to us. I think the difficulty with that is to get to the hope, you have to unpack a lot of the nope that people have been given, a lot of the misinformation or lies or environment, as you were alluding to, of, well, she was in the Caribbean, didn't have environmental stresses, was with family, didn't have all these pressures on her. So that environment then allowed her to have more hope and more of an ability to have that thought process of, oh, you know what? I can do this. And not just I can do this, but I'm going to do this. I think hope is super powerful. I remember doing an episode on a podcast with Chris Norton. His story, as I share it, people will probably start to remember it, but he was a college football player and he went to go make a tackle on a kickoff, had a C-spine injury, was airlifted to the hospital. He was given a 3% chance to ever move again. Not a 3% chance to walk again, but a 3% chance to ever move again. In the process, what he said is, 3%, that's not 0%. I'm going to take advantage of that 3%. So with hope, he started pursuing that. But in the process, he was in the hospital and started firing the providers that were telling him that he was making things up, because he started to get some shoulder movement. He started shrugging his shoulder and they're like, no, that's not really happening. He started to say, I'm feeling something in my foot. And they came in and said, that's phantom limb pain. You're not feeling that. You're paralyzed from the neck down. Like, you're not feeling these things. He started to get movement in his toe back. And again, they came in and said, you're not really moving it. It's a thing that's made up in your head. Well, yeah. And you progress to his college graduation, and he walked across the stage to receive his diploma. And then he gets engaged. He walks down the aisle to marry his wife. Now, was it the way that we would think of walking? No, he had assisted devices. He had people surrounding him. But this was a guy that was given a 3% chance to ever move again, who's now standing and moving his limbs under his own power with support around him to do this. And one of the things that he shared with me, and that he shared in his documentary and in his book, was if he didn't have the support from the community, his family started a Facebook group and people were pouring in messages of inspiration and how what he was doing was impacting their lives and the difference that he was making. He had his football team that was helping him to still pursue his college education. He had all the support in the world, but he was still being dealt this plate of nope. There was one nurse that came into him at nighttime, and he was just at a low. He was crying. He was thinking, I should start listening to this. This is what I'm stuck with. I'm not going to move again. And that nurse was the first one that got down on his level, looked him in the eyes, and said, Chris, this is possible. You can do this. And just that little extra time, that look in the eye, that getting to someone's level and giving them that message of encouragement is what fueled him to now get to that next level of that outcome. So I think as providers, that's on us when we're building these relationships with people. We want to give them hope. Now, the tricky part is that we don't want to be unrealistic with the hope that we're providing. So we want to go through a thorough assessment. We want to understand their past. We want to understand their goals. We want to understand their medical history. In doing that, we can start to provide appropriate hope, because back to the beginning, what do we need for hope? We need a framework, and getting those details then allow us to develop that framework.
So I'm wondering if in some way you think that the biggest nope that people might experience is the healthcare provider that doesn't know how to instill hope in someone's recovery process, because that most certainly exists in our Western medicine world.
It absolutely does. And I'm going to take it a step further and say that it's anyone that is a respected figure that is instilling nope into someone or rejecting someone, because it can go down to the level. A lot of my work is with athletes or lifelong athletes. And a lot of times it's from a coach they had when they were 7 years old. That
it could be a teacher,
a teacher of like, hey, you stink, go sit on the bench. Don't get slivers in your butt.
It could be the person, let's see. So let's kind of like bring this out a little bit. So it could be the person who is authorizing the insurance coverage, right? Because that's a person of respect where they say, well, our data shows that people like you don't walk again, so to speak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Or it could be a respected friend, or even a spouse. There's some research around, a spouse or significant other's influence on someone's recovery.
Absolutely. I've worked with people a lot that they're starting to have some knee discomfort and they don't want to have surgery. They know a total knee replacement is available, but they don't want that. So they want an alternative way to go about it. And sometimes the hardest part is getting their significant other on board with it. Because the typical conversation I think that I've run into, and maybe Joe, you've had a similar thing, is that the significant other goes, look, they're good when they see you, but you don't have to hear them complaining about their pain later on. And I'm dealing with the complaints, so I want this pain to be gone as soon as possible. And the way to do that is the surgery. So now as a provider, or bring it out to the bigger picture as a respected figure, you have to get the team on board. You have to put in that extra time. You have to take that next step to make sure everybody is rowing the boat in the same way. Because if one's rowing this way and the other one's rowing that way, you're just doing a circle the whole time. I used to get myself in those circle situations all the time. And I'd be like headbutting the desk of, why is this plan not working? What am I missing? And it was like, I didn't coach the whole team. I just, that person that we're working with, they have a support system with them that we should learn about as providers. And maybe you're not sitting down and getting a dinner with their second cousin. Like that's fine. You don't need to do that much work, but at least saying, what is your closest people to you? What do they think about the situation? What's the information that you're getting from them?
So let's give us a maybe one or two kind of practical, simple ways that someone can start to, move toward this direction. Because there are people listening right now. They're like, I get this 100%. I'm on board with this, but I want to know, how do I start to really shift myself or really shift my mindset, right? Because a lot of this revolves around someone's mindset. How do I start to shift my mindset toward a mindset of hope and healing?
Yeah. And that's key, because there's a readiness that has to be available for this to be successful. I love the quote from Hippocrates that says when a person is saying that they're ready to heal, ask them, are they ready to give up the things that made them ill? And I think that's so powerful of that question of, there's been a lot of things that have happened in your life that have led to this one point. It wasn't just this one experience. I will say, and I don't have research to back this, this is just from my clinical observation, but I've never worked with an athlete that got injured when they were at their best, when they were feeling their best, their families were all doing great. They had social support, they had sleep, they had nutrition, have never had that experience. Every athlete that I've worked with that has gotten injured on the field, you look a week or 2 weeks prior, and there was a significant event that happened, the loss of a loved one, not having enough community, not getting enough sleep, but there's something that preceded that injury happening. So with the shift in mindset to get someone on this path of healing, we have to look at the whole story. And so the person listening, I think the first step is you have to be willing to share that story with people that are on your team to get you to that next step. After sharing, you have to have an openness to learn and make sure that you're learning from credible information to allow that to start to shift your mindset and allow that to start to shift your perspective. Because I think the worst thing that happens is when people, for example, come on a podcast and they say something and then the person just goes, well, I'm going to go do that because Dillon said to go do that. Like, no, go put some research in and see, is that the right thing for you? Because my job, and I think you would agree, Joe, our job is we're here to guide people towards a solution. We're not here to be that solution for them. So when people say, oh, go see Dillon, Dillon fixed me, I go, no. I did not fix you. I guided you to the ability to fix yourself by putting the right resources in front of you. But it was you that did that. So if you're that person that has struggled with nope, you've faced this rejection, you don't want that anymore. You want to get back to hope. It starts with finding that person that you can work with, sharing their story, being open-minded, putting the work in that you're not just receiving the information, but you're an active part of it. And then as the perspective starts to shift and your body wants to start moving, well, that's when we have to start to let it move. I feel like constantly we're giving people permission to move. We're creating safety. And it's interesting because when we look at research in the business world of what makes a business organization successful, Amy Edmondson, she's done a ton of research in this. What makes a business successful? The number one factor that has emerged is psychological safety. When people feel safe, they're then more willing to take a potential risk because they know that they're going to be supported. I kind of jokingly say, but seriously say that when a newborn baby, or not newborn baby, but when a toddler is learning how to walk, they tend to fall about 17 times per hour. Each time they fall, the parent doesn't go, wow, you call that walking? That was terrible. Learn how to walk, kid. They go, they pick the kid up, they nurture, and they say, it's okay. Like, you hit the floor, but you're going to get it. Go ahead and try it. And even from that young age, that psychological safety that is presented allows us to then take these risks and move towards healing and really experiencing hope.
So Dillon, I want to make sure that we point everyone to your latest book. It's called Hope, Not Nope. Everyone can find that online, Amazon or your other favorite online book retailer. It's a great book that Dillon wrote on this concept, of course, that we spoke about on today's episode. Dillon, thanks for joining me here today. Let people know how people can learn more about you and follow your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, Joe. It's always great to connect with you and have these conversations. Website is www.hopenotnope.org. Instagram is Hope Not Nope. So feel free to DM us and chat with us there. As Joe said, the book is online. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. There's audiobook, physical copy, and Kindle available. So whatever one you like to read, it's available for you there.
All right, so everyone hop on over to hopenotnope.org to check out the book. If you are on Instagram, you can reach out to me or Dillon. You can find us on Instagram. We do lots of activity there. I want to thank everyone for joining us this week to talk about the importance of hope in healing and, of course, overcoming chronic pain. Make sure to share this episode with your friends and family on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, wherever anyone is talking about chronic pain and the hope to overcome it. I'm Dr. Joe Tatta. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Healing Pain Podcast with Dr. Joe Tatta. To subscribe to the podcast and learn more, visit Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. That's Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. Sign up to receive weekly updates, leave a review on iTunes, and share this episode with your friends.